Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, you guys. I feel like I'm sitting in the big girl chair here, so I don't know if that's good or bad, but I want to share a little bit about me, the way that I grew up. I am the oldest of 7 children, and I grew up here in Utah, in a small town in southern Utah, in Richfield, actually, just outside of Richfield, if you know where it is. And in my family, my parents were like hippies back in the day. Like before it was like real big to be a hippie, my parents were hippies. So structure wasn't our thing. My dad had been to Vietnam, had struggled with addiction and had come to the other side of it. And my mom was like really creative and loved to do, artsy things, but structure wasn't our thing. And going to school wasn't our thing. She homeschooled most of the kids and they just played around and did what they wanted to do. And so for me, like the regular path just wasn't gonna work. And by the time I was baptized a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Some of you, probably all of you know the church, but I wanted nothing to do with that. Man, when I was 13, I didn't want anything to do with school and I didn't want anything to do with the church. And I remember my first real struggle was with relationships. Like I thought what guys and boys thought of me was the most important thing. And it got me into a lot of trouble. And I remember, I started to party and just liked to do about anything but go to school. And by the time I was 17, I was pregnant with my first child. And I thought, well, this is what I am. This is what it's going to be for me. I moved into a low-income apartment. At that point, I was drinking a lot, but I wasn't using drugs yet. And again, I remember thinking, I just need to find the right guy. I need to find that guy, because that's going to solve my problems, right? And so I started dating someone, and I met a guy that was like 10 years older than me, and he told me, I think on our second or third date, you should marry me. And so I did, like a month later. You can tell I'm so committed, right? I'm making really good decisions. And it wasn't going great. I mean, I can't imagine why. It just wasn't really going that well. And about that time, my dad got a job in Salt Lake. And so for me, like most of my brothers and sisters were still at home with my parents. I hadn't really ever left that little town. Like we went to Orem. That was the city for us. And I don't think I'd ever even been on an airplane. And so I put my son in my car, drove up over the point of the mountain, and when I saw the city, I was like, yes, I could get a job. Maybe I could become something. And I went back and I told my husband, I said, hey, we should move up to Salt Lake. He's like, I am never leaving this town. And we don't even get along that well, so go ahead and go. And we were so committed, as you could tell, so I drove away with my son and moved up to the city with my parents. And filed for divorce and got a job working as a photographer because my uncle owned those Kitty Candid studios, if you're old enough to remember, that were in the mall. So I went and got a job there. And I actually felt pretty good about myself because it was like the first real job and skill that I had. And then I found out I was pregnant. And I remember calling my ex-husband and saying, hey, I'm having a baby. And he's like, well, you're on your own. We don't even get along. And you're living up there. And I'm never moving up there. And so I worked through my pregnancy, and my mom lived with my parents. And it was kind of a sad time for me. I remember after I had my little girl, my dad said, why don't you let me bless her? Because in the Mormon church, they bless their babies. I remember sitting in the room with all these other moms that had like husbands and families and trying to figure out, how do I get from here to there? I just don't know what they got going on. And again, I thought, I just need to find the right man. And so after I had my daughter, I started dating again and got pregnant again. And so I was scared because I was about 23, and this is number 3 for me. And they all have different fathers. And I knew I wasn't doing a very good job raising the 2 children that I had. And so I said a prayer. And I remember I hadn't really done a lot of that. And I said a prayer like, help me know what to do. And I felt this warmth come over me. And I knew that this child was special, that I was going to have him. It would be a boy. And I knew that he wasn't mine to keep. and that I had to find a family for him. And so I started looking for David's family. And I'm stubborn, so I went from lawyer to lawyer, trying to find the right people. And I was sitting in the attorney's office, and it was like the last file. I mean, I kept saying, do you have more files to look through? Because I just felt like I would know, like when I found the right family, And I remember my mom saying, it's going to be too hard. Like, just let me raise him. And I said, Mom, you didn't even raise me, for real. Like, that's not going to work, And she agreed. She's like, yeah, no, I really didn't. But so my mom wasn't like a real big strength at that point. It was hard for my dad to see me going through that, but I was determined that this was the right thing to do. And so I found, the last file that I looked at this attorney's office, they had 3 boys already, and they were all cuddled up, this family around a Christmas tree. And I told the assistant in the office, I said, this is the right family. This is David's family. And she said, there's no way the lawyer's going to let you pick that family because they already have 3 kids. And there's so many people waiting for children. And I said, yeah, but it's the right family. So he kept putting me off. And then finally I just said, you know what? I'll just go find them myself. I know where they live. It's fine. And he's like, all right, I'll set up the appointment, And so I met him. And I knew right when I met him, I met David's mother, Rhonda, and I loved her, and his dad. And they came to every doctor appointment with me. And it was an awesome experience. And I had no idea how painful it would be. I mean, I knew, because in my mind I kept imagining, like, the day I have this child, he's going home with them. This isn't my child to keep. And I told myself that, but I wasn't sleeping at night. I wasn't getting counseling. And up to that point, like, I had kind of dabbled with drugs, but I didn't know that kind of pain until after I had David. And then it was just like total emptiness. As beautiful as the experience was, I just felt completely empty inside. And they wrote me a prescription for Percocet, and I was off to the races. And I just used all the time, as much as I could. And I went from place to place getting drugs. And eventually I went to street drugs. I started using methamphetamine. And at this point, I lose my job, and I'm not coming home for my own kids, and I'm having nothing to do with the child I gave up for adoption. That's way too painful for me. And I remember coming home late one night, and my son had been crying. He was like 9 years old, and he had been looking out the window waiting for me for hours, and he was crying. And my mom was sitting there with him, and she goes, this little boy doesn't want anything but you. And if this isn't enough for you, whatever would be. And that night, I walked downstairs with my son, and I laid on the floor, and I sobbed. And I begged God to take it from me. I said, I will give up everything. I don't care if I'm ever happy again. I'll never date again. Whatever you want to do in my life is okay, but I can't live like this anymore. I'm so tired of hurting the people I love. I couldn't remember who I was anymore. My life was drugs. That was it. It was trying to get him. It was going to drug dealers. It was not, there wasn't anything of me left in it. I couldn't remember when I even gave birth to my kids. It was like I was losing myself in it. And I made promise after promise that I would quit using. Every night when I got high, I would make a plan to quit using. Every day I would call the dealer and say, don't sell to me anymore. Or I'd go up the mountain and bury the drugs and then drive back up and try to find them, It was just like, I was licked. I was licked, and I knew it. And that night, when I said that prayer, I was desperate. And my little boy, he says, Mom, why are you so sad? And he's looking at me and he goes, Mom, why are you so sad? And I said, Jace, I'm so ugly. How could I do this to you? He's like, Mom, come look in the mirror. He goes, look how beautiful you are, And the next day, I was so desperate, I walked across the street and asked an LDS bishop who I'd never met to help me. Like, I'm so desperate, And he goes, yeah, you need help. Like, you need help, more help than I can give you. He's like, I'll help you if I can. But he called somebody that was in the AA program. And that guy took me to my first meeting. And when I got to the meeting, I sat outside and smoked about every 5 minutes because, I needed to have a cigarette. And he looks at me and he goes, you need to get yourself in that meeting and listen to what they have to say. He said, you told me you were desperate and you wanted help, but if you can't even go sit there for 30 minutes, he said, nah, you got to get in there. He goes, you can have a cigarette after the meeting. So I went in and I listened, and there was a man in the front of the room that was lit up. He had 2 years sober, right? Like when you get sober, you get lit up, you get all that light back. And he was telling this story that I could relate to. It was like, man, he was talking about throwing the alcohol out the window and all the promises he made to himself that he couldn't keep and the things he did to his family. And if he had been through that stuff and he was standing in the front of the room, 2 years sober and lit up, there was a path for me. There was hope. So I went up to him after the meeting and I said, what can I do to get sober? How can I do what you did? And he said, you got to become a nice person. I was like, become a nice person. Well, that's not that easy when you're as selfish as I was, you know? So he gave me the big book and he said, read this book and do the best you can to work those steps and start serving. Do something for somebody else. So I started down that road. And people told me the truth. When I went into those meetings, people told me the truth. And the good news is I didn't trust myself anymore, so I listened. Because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. So when they told me what to do, I did it. And I remember telling a guy in one of the meetings, I said, but I got this great big problem. You know, my life is such a mess. And he said, yeah, you can't focus on that. That's going to work itself out. You got to do the next right thing, one day at a time. And I remember going into my dad's office and saying, Dad, I've screwed up so bad. I can't focus. I can't talk to my kids. I don't have a relationship with them. He said, one day at a time, one page at a time. You read your kids a book. You walk up the street and back with your kids. He said, Portia, I pretty much figured you were going to die, and I gave up. So it's on you. You're going to have to figure this out. All I can tell you is one step at a time. It's not going to happen overnight. So I got through it. I craved drugs. I dreamed about drugs. I wanted to use drugs. I missed the lifestyle, the people that I met using drugs. And every single day, I didn't do it. I didn't go do drugs. I didn't go hang out with the people I was hanging out with. And sometimes I would lock myself in the bathroom and I would shake because I wanted to use drugs, you know? Whatever I had to do, because it gets so much better. I didn't know then. But what I knew is that I was so sick and tired of hurting the people I loved, and I couldn't do it the way I had been doing it. I didn't know life gets amazing. I just knew that I was sick and tired of it being as awful as it was. 6 months in, 6 months sober, I go to my first field trip with my kid. Okay, I'm sitting at the zoo with my son, and I'm like, I'm being a good mom. I'm looking around like, you guys, this is amazing. I'm being a good mom. How beautiful is that? I'm being a good mom. And that day, when I looked at my son and I felt good about myself as a person, I looked around and I looked at all the animals that God created and how they all work together and how the earth, and I thought, if God can do this, he can solve my problems. Because I couldn't see a God that I couldn't touch and feel. I was so disconnected from that. But when I sat there that day, it became real to me that there was a power greater than me that keeps this universe going that could solve my problems. And I continued on that path. 9 months sober, I rolled the windows down in the car and felt joy for the first time in my life. I felt free. I remember sitting there with the sun on my face thinking, man, if I would have known, it would have been worth it so much longer ago if I would have known how good life can get. Because I felt empty. I thought the only way that I could feel right was using drugs. And that day, I felt better than I had ever felt. I was like, this is the real deal right here. And then, while I'm not looking for someone, I meet my husband. So just don't look. And he's a great guy. And don't ask me why he let me trick him into marrying me, but he did. Somehow, I tricked him into marrying me. And he adopted my kids. And we started down that path. And like things do get, my life got amazing. Because when you're sober, that happens. And I was grateful. I mean, it didn't have to be like, I was just grateful when I woke up in the morning and I wasn't in a dope house. I was just grateful when I woke up in the morning and I took my kids to school. Because that's beautiful. I was grateful every day because I knew the difference. That is what I love about people that are in recovery, that have walked that road. We know how lucky we are for the simple things in life. We bought a little old house here in American Fork, and I started my own company as a photographer. My uncle was Corey Adams, or is Corey Adams, but I was working for him, and I started my own company. And life just kept getting better. I started doing first 20 weddings a month, or 20 weddings a year, then 40, then 100. It's just growing, and then 200. And I have employees, and things are going great, kinda, because I quit doing those things that they told me to do in that book. I quit taking care of myself. And Chad and I had a couple kids, and I had a back surgery, and I relapsed on prescription drugs. And I remember thinking, I can handle it, because I'm not hitting the streets, I'm not using meth, I'll never use meth, I can do this. I probably should quit, but I don't want to let people down, I'll just use a little bit, I can handle it. I should quit, I'll quit for, it didn't work. And I don't just like drugs, I like to hustle. I like money, I like to do both. So real estate starts booming. And I decide I want to build a house for my studio. And then I'm thinking to myself, all I have to do is start buying and flipping lots. And I can make more money doing that than I am doing this. And then I can stay home with my kids. See, like the logic? I just need to do another business so that I can spend some time with my kids, right? Yeah. So about that time, first it started with lots. And I remember the first time someone showed me an equity deal, like these real estate deals. You buy this, you borrow more than it's worth, you beef up the value, you flip it. I thought, that guy's crazy. I would never do that. And 6 months later, with a whole lot of OxyContin, I was doing nothing but those deals. And I just kept on going. And I remember feeling the weight of the world on me. And I remember being way too busy to spend any time with my kids. And I started letting my photography business go. And my marriage wasn't doing so great either. And then the FBI showed up. And that's something none of you want to have. I don't know, maybe some of you have experienced. It's just really all bad when they show up. And they don't just show up at your house, they show up at your neighbor's house, and they show up wherever you're doing business. And it sucks really bad. And I'm like, please, 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 no. The first time they show up on my porch, I've got my little baby, my youngest daughter, in my arms. And I'm like, man, I'll give you anything just to go away. You don't know how hard I worked for this. And they just looked at me, and then they looked at my husband and said, you're going to have to decide which side you're on, because we can wrap you up in a conspiracy. And I'm like, this is war. Like, you can't have what I have. This is war, And the right thing at that point, because I've had enough time to think about it, would have been like to say, yep, I made a mistake and owned it, to move forward. Because that's where your power lies, right? Like, just own the mistake. Man, did I learn that. A mistake is a mistake, and by far the worst mistake is to deny that mistake. Because you deny it and it will drag on and on, which is exactly what happened for me. I drug that thing on for so long, and I just kept on using my pills. And eventually I'm using, everything, benzos and Adderall, and you name it. I have cocktails going, and I'm still trying to hustle to make money. And it was a long, awful time. And my kids are growing up with a mom that's totally disconnected and terrified that I'm going to have to leave my kids. Eventually, I walked into the federal courthouse anyway. This isn't something I share often, but they asked me to come up to talk about revoking my pretrial release. Because why? Because I'm like getting prescriptions at every other doctor, everywhere I can. And they say, well, my probation or pretrial officer says, hey, Portia, come on up, and the judge wants to talk to you about this. And there's a good chance they're going to lock you up. And I've been fighting my case for a long time, and and I'm stubborn, so I'm not going to plead guilty. I'm going to show them, And the day that happened, I'm sitting in the courtroom, and next door, there's a guy that's going on his first day of trial. And the U.S. Marshals, he stands up with a pencil in his hand, and they shoot the guy. And then the marshals come running through my courtroom, and they go downstairs, and I walk out the front with the guy on a gurney and tell the news that the marshal shot him. Because I'm mad, and I'm going to show them, And the next day, I get locked up on a violation. And it's 3 weeks until I'm going to go to trial. Well, what do you think is going to happen to me? I'm going to detox. I'm going to detox hard, right? And they know that. So they're saying, we're going to lock you up if you don't plead guilty. And I'm like, oh no, I'm not pleading guilty. Oh man, suffering, which was what I was so terrified of. I went 10 days, didn't even know my name. Like nobody should ever suffer that way. Awful, awful stuff. And by the time I got out 3 months later, because I'm acting crazy, I'm like pushing officers and anything I can do, I am suffering. By the time I get out, I'm like all mixed up in the head. And then I get to go before the judge and walk in the courtroom, and they're going to sentence me. And up until that point, I'm in denial. It's not me, it's them, they're dirty. Well, when you walk into the courtroom, and I don't know how many of you have, or if you ever will, I hope not, because man, it is a lonely day. And it's very difficult to continue to deny what's going on when you're sitting in the front of the room and they say, the United States of America versus Portia Louder, things get real, real fast. And I turn around and I look at my husband and my kids and I think, what have I done? How could I have done this? And pretended it wasn't happening. How could I have done that? My youngest daughter was 7 years old, sitting on my husband's lap. And I know right then, they're going to give me 7 years. I'm facing 0 to 7, and they're going to give me the max. And I just start to cry. And the judge says, do you have anything to say? And I said, yes, I am sorry. And I'm sure you're going to do what you need to do today, and I probably deserve it, but please have some compassion on my husband and my kids. And then I sat down and he said, thank you, Miss Louder. I'm sentencing you to 84 months in federal prison, which is 7 years. And my husband stands up and he hands our little girl to our oldest daughter, and he's pretty emotional. So it takes him a minute to compose himself. And he said, please, Your Honor, don't take her into custody today. Give her a chance to say goodbye to her kids. And I'm like, I just drug this man through years of awfulness. And that judge, he got nothing on me right now because I've got everything that matters right there. And I gave it all away for money. I gave it all away for money. My life changed that day. I died that day. Whatever person existed was gone. On our way home, I had 8 weeks to say goodbye to my family. And I looked around and I thought, why are people still driving like how can they just pretend nothing happened? Everything just shifted. The whole world just changed. And I went home and I looked at my kids and I thought, how could I have been so foolish? How could I have traded everything important for money? In my book, money and drugs are in the same category. And I spent that time, I'd drive my son to school and I'd just cry. I looked at him. He's like, Mom, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And I said, Jackson, I can't believe I never noticed how beautiful it is just to drive you to school. How did I miss this? I couldn't believe that I missed everything important. I was trying to make money to spend time with my kids, and I gave up all the time I had with my kids for money. It was just such a shock to me. And 8 weeks later, I walked into each of my kids' rooms. They were sleeping. I watched them sleep. I got up, I cleaned my house, and then I said goodbye to my kids, and my husband drove me to Dublin, California. And I walked into a federal prison, and I felt so alone. I thought, I can't do this. There is no way. I can't do this. Everybody's wearing khaki. There's 1,000 women. Nobody seemed very happy to see me. Nobody said, hey, welcome. It wasn't like that, We're glad you're here. It's like, are you kidding me? I can't live here. I can't do this. Everything beautiful in my life is gone. And I sat in my room, in my bunk for 3 days. First of all, I'm detoxing again, because of course they let me out and I used again. So I'm sick, So let's just get real. I'm sick and I'm miserable and I'm hurting, and I'm hurting on a level I didn't know I could hurt. And I decided to get on my knees and I said, I need to know who I am to you. And I felt this incredible amount of love. I felt the kind of love I've never felt in my life. Way more love than my husband can even give, and he loves me a lot. I felt loved, and I thought, I didn't need a man. I had no idea how loved and valuable we are. We are so valuable. And in that place, detoxing, miserable, walking into federal prison, nobody, I knew I had the most important purpose on this earth, that God had a plan for me. And I could see that that was the case for every one of the women in that prison, how loved they were, that they all had an important purpose on this earth. Now I know who I am to God. Now I can do whatever I have to do. That is my number one right there. That is where my power and my identity comes from. And I knew what people think, irrelevant. Who I am and my integrity, that's what I care about. When I look in the mirror, if I like it, it's good. If someone else doesn't, that's their problem. It's okay. Up to that point, I was always so worried about everything outside myself, not anymore. It was so hard. I'm not gonna lie. Like, there were times of connection that were beautiful. I love the women I met in prison. My first year, I pretty much lived in denial still. I'm still like, I got a lawyer out there, he's gonna get me out. I'm not gonna do 4.5, there's no way, I'm not gonna do 7 years, I'm not gonna do it. And I was still pretty stubborn, so I was writing about the institution, sending it home, put this on my blog, post this on my blog. And the lieutenant calls me over and he's like, Louder, why are you doing that? You're making your time so much harder on yourself. I said, if you don't like it, you can open the door and let me out. He's like, no, I think I'll put you in the shoe and ship you to another prison. Right? Like, it doesn't go that way. You'd think I would have learned my lesson. So I got shipped to Minnesota. And that was a whole experience too. I was gonna bring you guys a couple copies of my book to throw around, but yeah, I got to have the whole Con Air experience. Like, they show up, the marshals show up with like big old guns, and you're like, wait a second, I'm just like a real estate person, and I'm in like handcuffs and shackled, and I'm like they've got people boxed, they're ready to black box me. I'm like, what is happening? Oh no, you got the real experience here, girl, because you're just that stubborn. So I spent a couple months getting transferred around, and then I got transferred to Minnesota. And I remember like being on this bus, going out to the middle of nowhere in Minnesota, far away from my family, and just feeling so sad. Like, why, just sad. Like, what have I done? When I got to Minnesota, I spent my first 6 months just sitting under a tree crying, honestly. I don't know about you guys, but you go in, you get sober, and all of a sudden it's like the tears, the emotion, the feelings, And that's what happened. So I had some experiences. I met a girl in prison that taught me how powerful accountability is. Because I was feeling angry at myself for what I had done. Just angry, like, how could I have done this? So sad and so angry. And this gal comes in to our treatment unit, and she is beautiful, and she's got pain in her. I can see it. And a week later, she tries to kill herself. She goes in the showers and she tries to cut herself, and we're all traumatized, and they take her down to psychology, and then they bring her back. And she sits there quietly in the back of the room because everybody's kind of tripped out by what happened. And then she walks up to the front of the room. She goes, I want to share an assignment. And she starts to read this list of everything she's ever done to hurt anyone. And this was like no joke. Like, I lost my kids because I did this and this and this. I did that. I almost killed so-and-so. I deserved to be here. I lied and cheated on my husband and this. And it was just like a full-on list of everything she'd ever done. And she took full accountability for it. And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, that's courage, right? That's power. Because I'm sitting there trying to, I'm a nice Mormon girl. Nope. She was like straight up threw it out. And you could feel the power in the room. And when she got done, the therapist in the room said, I just have one question. I just want to know what would make you care enough about your recovery today to stand here and be so honest. And she goes, because I've tried everything else but being honest. And I'm going to be honest or I'm going to die. That's what it is. And I was like, oh yeah, whatever she did, I want that. And I followed her out and I said, I want to know how you did it. She goes, you got to just get real with yourself and not care what anyone else thinks. So I made a spreadsheet. It's like a huge old spreadsheet. It took me 6 months. I'm like, when I was 4, I stole $5 from my mom. When I was, everything I could think of went on my list in categories. There was like theft and lying and cheating and sex and drugs and breaking the law and all that stuff. And it all went on my spreadsheet because I was doing things when I was young, hustling long before I got caught. So, So anyway, I put it all on the list, and then I asked the girls if they'd come down to the rec yard with me and let me share my list. And I was nervous. I felt some anxiety to say that crap out loud, but I did it. I said it. When I started talking about the money crimes, one of the girls sitting in the circle, she goes, I used to work at McDonald's and I stole a lot of chicken nuggets. I'm looking at her like, you did not just say that. I'm talking about millions of dollars, you know? Like, it was really nice of you to throw that in the circle, but yeah. Yeah, it didn't really do much to make me feel better. But anyway, I said it. I said it out loud, and then I had a little ceremony, and I buried that crap in the rec yard. And a couple of things happened. One was, everyone else in the circle started telling me their dirt. They'd like wake me up in the middle of the night. Hey, Louder, guess what? I did this and this and this and this. And I was like, yes, tell me. Let's just leave this crap here. Let's just say it out loud and let's go home without it. So that was really cool. But the other thing that happened is I started feeling free again. I started feeling free, man. I let that stuff go. I started imagining a new future for myself. I started seeing things differently. I felt empowered. I felt free. I didn't feel in prison anymore. I felt more free in there than I felt out here because I said that crap out loud. Once you say that, it doesn't have power over you anymore. And I learned some lessons because I'd walk in, and I remember one time I was trying to explain to an officer, well, I didn't sign my pay sheet because of this and this and this. And he's like, Louder, just own it. You're better than that. You don't need to make no excuse for that. And I was like, yeah, I just didn't want to do it. And I realized, like, every time I just own something, that's where my power lies. When I start making excuses, nope, I'm giving away my power. And so I learned that it's okay to just tell people if, sorry, I don't want to talk to you. Sorry, whatever it is, just be straightforward, So I met some beautiful people in prison, so many people that I got so close to. I met this gal, her name's Christina, and I love her. We're like bestest, just so close. She walked into prison, 26 years old, just beautiful blonde girl, raised so poor from Minnesota, nothing. Her mother died from a drug overdose. Her dad committed suicide. Her husband, she got married when she was like 16, had a kid. He's murdered because they were doing drugs and in the mix. And so he was killed, and she gave her son to his mom to raise. And she's got nothing. She was a drug addict. She came to prison, and I never saw her feel sorry for herself. She never complained. She never said, poor me. She got up every morning, and she took notes around to all the elderly inmates telling them nice things. Or she'd leave notes for me, and every night she's on her knees praying at a folding chair for like 40 minutes. And I'm going, who does this, And when I get ready to leave, she says, Miss Portia, will I see you again? I said, oh yeah, you're going to see me again, And so I leave, and because I went to the camp when I got done there, and she comes home and she sends me this letter, and she says, I'm in college. A girl like me, a high school dropout, I'm in college now, Miss Portia. I'm like, that's amazing, Christina. She gets a job working for at a care center for the elderly and becomes best friends with this woman named Cecile who's had a stroke. And Cecile happens to be also a member of the LDS church. So she tells Christina, I've been waiting for you. I'm ready to die, but until you get baptized, I can't die. So Christina calls me and she goes, you're not going to believe this, but my very best friend says I need to talk to your people's missionaries. And I was like, oh, you are not doing that. So she talks to the missionaries, and she meets a guy named Woody at an NA meeting, and Woody's like, whatever light you have, I want. He's been sober for about 10 years. He did prison time. So he starts meeting with the missionaries, and both of them get baptized. And I fly out there and sit next to Cecile and Woody and Christina, and I felt the kind of joy that only comes when you have really suffered and you've seen the other side. And Christina tells me, hey, guess what, Miss Portia? My son's coming to stay with me. I'm buying a comforter. I'm buying a comforter for him. That's the kind of joy we get to have, you guys. When we turn back, that's the kind of joy we have waiting for us, all those simple, beautiful things. So it came time for me, guys. It came time. They called my name over the intercom. Louder, 4.5 years later, my husband's sitting outside in the parking lot waiting for me. And I did the work. And I walked out of that prison with nothing but a box with a few things in it, because everything that mattered was inside my heart. And I knew that I had an important purpose, and I didn't know what it was. I came home and I knew my life wasn't going to be about money. I went to the halfway house. I met some cool people there. And then I went home with my husband. I started rebuilding my life. And I got a job working at a treatment center. And I was working grave shifts at night, and I started writing a book. I thought, I'm going to just write this book, you know? I've got the content from my blog. And at first, it was just the girls at the treatment center loved my stories. So I would write, and they'd read it, and then I'd send it in to my friends in prison, and they loved it. And then I found an editor, and I published it. And people started asking me to share my story. I reconnected with the son that I gave up for adoption. He's come back into my life. That's beautiful. He's a videographer, so we work together on projects. Sometimes he comes with me when I speak and he videos, and we've put projects together. That's been amazing. He's connected with my other kids. That's been amazing. My life is beautiful. It's not always easy. I don't give a garbage about money. It's simple. I pretty much don't care about, I wear the same dang clothes every day. I don't care because I figured out what really matters, What I know is that my sobriety is number one. If I lose that, I got nothing. Right before I published my book, I had an injury, and it was a bad injury, and the paramedics had to come, and I was like, I'm a drug addict, don't give me anything, Because I know that's the one thing that can take me out. So I work hard to stay sober, because when we're sober, everything else is gonna happen for us. Beautiful things happen for us. I want you guys to know how grateful I am to be able to share with you guys tonight. I love you. I don't even know you, and I love you because we've been through the same hard stuff. I want you to know that the best is yet to come, that you have this incredible purpose, and that your story is important for somebody out there. There are people out there that need to hear your story. My story is not going to work for them. It's your story and what you've been through. You have an amazing ending in you. There's a lot of people I've met that have a pretty crazy, tragic beginning. But when you have an amazing ending, it gives meaning to all that hard stuff that you went through. And you can do it. I know you can. If you're honest with yourself and you become a good person, like that guy told me in that meeting. You got to be nice. And that's. I'm going to leave it there and wrap it up there, and then we'll open it up after you get a break for questions. So thanks, you guys.